What if God's silence isn't abandonment, but alignment? What if the moment you feel most forsaken is the exact moment heaven is closest, holding its breath as you walk through fire, not to burn, but to become gold? Here's the paradox. Over 60% of believers have confessed that during their most painful seasons, God felt absent, silent, cold. They prayed, fasted, worshipped. Nothing. No vision, no word. Just divine radio silence, like throwing your soul into the sky and getting back nothing but wind. But what if that silence isn't empty space? What if it's sacred space? The kind of silence that doesn't signal distance, but invitation. This is the divine wilderness, a place where the map catches fire and the compass breaks, a place where feelings evaporate, plans collapse, and only one thing remains: trust without proof. Welcome to the terrain where faith either dies or becomes immortal, where every prophet, every warrior, every son and daughter of God must pass through, not as punishment, but as preparation. Because if you're not hearing him, maybe, just maybe, he's not ignoring you. He's initiating something deeper. In this cinematic journey, you'll uncover 20 sacred revelations hidden in the silence, each one a whisper waiting to change your life. And by the end, you won't just survive the wilderness. You'll understand why God led you there in the first place. You don't need to hear God to be held by him. That's the first thing the wilderness will teach you, if you stay long enough to hear its whispers. The divine wilderness isn't loud. It's not fire from the sky or thunder from mountaintops. It's subtle, it's dry, it's slow, and it speaks in a language only desperation can translate. Most people think if God is real, he must be vocal. He must flood you with clarity, fill your heart with peace, answer prayers like lightning bolts. But what if the silence is the voice? What if his absence is actually his method? Imagine this. A young man is hired to be a bodyguard for a VIP. But the twist, the VIP never shows his face. No texts, no emails, only cryptic symbols and silence. At first, the young man panics. Is he real? Am I protecting a ghost? But over time, he starts decoding the signals. A shifted object means move. A missing item means prepare. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was encrypted strategy. The wilderness works the same. It forces your soul to listen differently, to search deeper, to survive not on certainty, but surrender. Moses knew this terrain well. 40 years in Midian before God spoke through a burning bush. 40 years of no visions, no booming voices, no parting seas, just sheep and dust and the sound of his own breathing. And yet, that was the training ground for the Red Sea miracle. Not the palace, not Egypt, the wilderness. Here's what the author was really getting at. The wilderness isn't just a waiting room. It's a whispering room. But you have to stop screaming to hear it. You have to stop demanding rescue and start asking better questions. Not God, where are you? But God, what are you saying through this silence? In today's hyper-connected world, silence is an endangered species. Our generation equates presence with pings, spirituality with stimulation. So when God goes quiet, we assume he left. But maybe he turned the volume down to draw you closer. Maybe the whispers are the point. Ask yourself, have you ever felt like your prayers hit the ceiling? Like your worship returned void? What if from now on, you didn't interpret that as failure, but as invitation? What if you leaned in instead of pulling away? Because this whispering wilderness is not a death sentence, it's an initiation. And if you stay long enough, if you stop demanding thunder and start tuning to whisper, you might just hear something that will change your destiny. But that's only the beginning. Because once the whisper fades, the questions get louder. The next one hits harder than silence itself. There's a kind of ache that only heaven's silence can cause. It's not like the pain of heartbreak or the sting of failure. No, this one runs deeper. It's the hollow echo of being ghosted by God. You reach for him, and the line goes dead. No sign, no voice, no peace. Just divine static. It feels cruel. Personal, like maybe you did something wrong. But here's the devastating truth. Even Jesus experienced it. My God, why have you forsaken me? Those weren't just poetic words from the cross. They were raw, real. The cry of someone who once heard the Father's voice at his baptism, now hanging in silence. So if the Son of God was ghosted, why do we panic when it happens to us? Let me take you to a real-life moment. A young woman battling cancer, praying every night for healing. She believes, she worships through the chemo. She quotes verses, and still, nothing. The scans get worse. The hair falls out. The prayers feel like they're bouncing off steel. Her journal reads, "God, where are you? I can't do this if you're gone." That was her wilderness. But what she didn't see was the quiet transformation happening within. Her bitterness turned to beauty. Her faith became flame, not because she heard God, but because she trusted him when she didn't. What John Bevere means, but never spells out, is this. The silence is not a lack of love. It's a deeper kind of love. One that doesn't coddle but chisels. One that trusts you enough to withdraw the training wheels. And in that silence, God is closer than breath. He's watching who you become when the spotlight's off. In modern faith culture, we associate God with breakthroughs, loud worship, and viral testimonies. But the truest testimonies are forged in the dark. Quiet, raw, hidden. God ghosting you is not rejection, it's revelation, a test, an invitation, a divine dare. Will you still love me when I say nothing? So let me ask you, have you ever been ghosted by heaven? Sat in the pew, wept at the altar, stared at the ceiling, and begged for even a whisper? What if you reframe that void? What if it's not emptiness, but expansion? What if silence is space, holy space, where faith isn't just tested, but matured? The ghosting isn't proof God left. It might be the clearest sign he's preparing something you're not ready to hold yet. But here's the twist. Just when you start adjusting to silence, something even more terrifying happens. The map disappears completely. You don't just feel ignored, you feel lost. That's when God pulls the next thread in the wilderness. You're driving through a desert. No signs, no gas stations, no voices on the radio. You glance at your phone. The GPS has frozen. Signal lost. No service. You're officially off the grid. That's how it feels when you've followed God faithfully. And suddenly, there's no next step, no confirmation, no green light, just stillness. You begin to panic. Did I miss something? Was that last yes really a no in disguise? But what if the silence isn't because you're off track, but because you're exactly where you're supposed to be? Pilots call it radio silence. A period where the control tower deliberately stops sending signals, not because the plane is crashing, but because the route is clear. The same happens in the spirit. You're mid-air, cruising through obedience, and God goes quiet. No directions. No course correction. Just trust. God's not correcting you. He's confirming you. But the silence is testing whether you believe what he said last, or need him to repeat it just to keep walking. Think of Joseph. He had a dream from God, leadership, royalty, favor. But after that, nothing. No angelic updates in the prison. No hang in there visions in the pit. Just betrayal, silence, and years. Yet, he didn't derail. He didn't detour. He kept serving, kept trusting. Because when the GPS goes dark, character lights the way. What the author truly teaches, beneath every sentence, is that divine silence isn't absence. It's trust. God doesn't ghost immature believers. He stays loud for them. But with sons and daughters he trusts. He pulls back his voice and lets them walk by memory. Like a father stepping behind his child's first solo bike ride. Silent, smiling, right there. But not holding anymore. And in 2025, this hits even harder. Our world is addicted to instant feedback. Likes, pings, alerts. Even our spirituality has become performance-based. We expect divine approval in real time. If God loves me, he'll confirm this job. He'll send peace. But heaven isn't a vending machine. It's a furnace. And sometimes, the only way to shape eternal faith is to withdraw the voice and let you remember it. Let me ask you, what do you do when your GPS freezes? When the map disappears? When God says, go, but won't tell you where? What if from now on, you treated that silence as a compliment? What if the very stillness driving you mad is actually the Father whispering, I trust you now? But silence isn't the only test, because even when you accept the quiet, another storm rolls in. Your feelings, they vanish. Your spirit goes numb. Now you're not just hearing nothing, you're feeling nothing. And that, my friend, is where most people quit. There comes a point where it's not just God's voice that goes quiet, it's your own heart. Worship feels mechanical. Prayer turns into background noise. You don't feel peace, joy, conviction, or even fear, just emptiness. It's like spiritual anesthesia. You're awake but numb, breathing but disconnected. This is the emotional mirage, a season where feelings vanish and all that's left is faith, or what's left of it. Here's the trap. We think feelings are faith. So when the feelings die, we assume faith died with them. But that's the lie. Faith is what keeps walking when emotion sits down. Think of it like crossing a desert. You look ahead and see what looks like an oasis. Water, shelter, maybe even a palm tree or two. But as you draw closer, it vanishes. Just heat waves. A trick of light. That's how emotions behave in the wilderness. One moment you're moved by worship. The next, you feel nothing. Not because God left, but because your soul is detoxing from the addiction to spiritual adrenaline. Let me tell you about a pastor in Brazil. For years, he preached with fire. People wept, fell to their knees, lives changed. But one year, after a personal loss, something shifted. He stepped onto the pulpit and felt nothing. No presence, no power, just silence. For months, he kept preaching. But inside, he felt like a fraud. He almost quit. Until one night, alone, he cried, God, if you never let me feel you again, I'll still serve you. I'll still love you, even if you never show up like before. And in that surrender, the fire returned, not instantly, but steadily. He learned, God's presence isn't always felt, but it's always faithful. What John Bevere was peeling back is this. Emotional dryness is not spiritual death. It's training. God is maturing you, teaching you to love him with loyalty, not just goosebumps. In a world of dopamine hits and emotional highs, true faith is boring. It's choosing him on the days when you feel absolutely nothing. Because love that needs constant affirmation isn't love. It's dependency. Feelings are rain. They come and go. But obedience? That's water from the rock. That's the stuff that sustains when the sky refuses to cry. But here's the setup. Once you've survived the silence and walked through numbness, God brings you to a room no one likes. A room with no clocks, no timelines, no exits. It's called waiting. Waiting is holy, but it rarely feels that way. In fact, waiting is one of the most despised rooms in the kingdom of God. There are no magazines, no music, just a ticking silence and a whisper you can barely hear. Not yet. And that whisper, it doesn't come with a reason. No explanation. No estimated time of arrival. Just stillness. God doesn't rush masterpieces. But to us, it feels like torture. Like we've been forgotten. Like we've missed our moment. Let me paint a picture. A young entrepreneur has a dream to build a faith-based tech platform. He prays, plans, even gets a small investor. Then, silence. Deals fall through. His team leaves. His faith wavers. One night, he's curled up on a borrowed couch, eating ramen noodles, asking God, why make me dream if you were just going to delay it? Months pass. Then out of nowhere, a single connection sparks a chain of events, and the vision explodes into life. But here's the twist. Had he succeeded earlier, he would have ruined it. He wasn't ready. His character couldn't carry what his dream required. The delay wasn't denial. It was development. That's the waiting room. It's not a punishment. It's a proving ground. And what John Bevere teaches, between the lines, is that God uses delay not to test your hope, but to sculpt your endurance. Waiting reveals what you believe when there's nothing left to cling to. Not signs, not feelings, just the raw choice to stay seated until he calls your name. Culturally, we hate waiting. We microwave everything. We fast-track deliveries, binge whole series overnight, demand instant downloads. So when God says, wait, we treat it like a glitch, like heaven's behind schedule. But in heaven's economy, waiting isn't passive, it's formative. It strips away your agenda, your entitlement, even your identity, until only trust remains. Ask yourself, what if the thing you're praying for today is still marinating in heaven's oven because you're not ready to digest it? What if the relationship, the breakthrough, the calling would poison you if it came too soon? Would you still want it? The waiting room is where warriors are forged, where orphans become sons, where noise dies so identity can breathe. The enemy wants you to pace. God wants you to sit, not because you're forgotten, but because you're being formed. But here's where the wilderness takes a darker turn, because once you finally surrender to the wait, you step into the furnace. Not just delay, but pressure. A pressure so fierce it will either purify your faith or expose every crack in it. Faith isn't proven on the mountaintop, it's proven in the furnace. That's where gold gets its glow, not by being protected, but by being exposed to fire so hot it melts the impurities right out. And God? He's the refiner. Not a cruel one, not careless, but intentional. He watches every flame, every flicker, every second. Because the fire was never meant to destroy you, it was designed to reveal you. Imagine a blacksmith holding a blade over the forge. He doesn't toss it in and walk away. No, he watches. He turns. He times it. He knows the exact moment to pull it out and shape it. That's how God handles your life when it enters the fire. But here's the twist. You don't feel him watching. You don't feel shaped. You just feel burned. Let's go back to a true story. Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch watchmaker who risked her life to hide Jews during World War II. Eventually, she was captured and sent to a concentration camp. Starvation, torture, loss. Every day she prayed. Every day, silence. Her sister died in that camp. And yet, Corrie would later say, there is no pit so deep that God is not deeper still. Out of that fire, a global ministry was born. But first, the flame, the isolation, the fire. What John Bevere reveals is this. God doesn't test us to discover our limits. He already knows them. He tests us so we can see who we really are. Trials reveal what comfort conceals. Pain exposes what praise hides. The fire strips away the pretty layers of performance until only the unshakable remains. In 2025, many Christians want spotlight without heat, influence without testing. They want the crown, but not the crucible. But the kingdom doesn't work that way. If your calling is heavy, your fire will be hotter. Not because God is cruel, but because he's preparing you to carry something weighty without crumbling. Have you ever felt like everything was falling apart? Marriage, money, mind? Like life was scraping away your gold plating to see what was underneath? What if? That was exactly what God needed to do. What if the blessing you're asking for can only be trusted with the version of you that walks out of this fire? Here's the beauty. Gold doesn't fear the flame, because it knows it's not being destroyed, it's being refined. But fire isn't the final stage. No. Once the gold emerges, once the testing fades, something more painful begins. Waiting, with a promise in your pocket, but no fulfillment in sight. There is a peculiar agony in holding a promise from God, but not the position that comes with it. It's like being crowned king in private, only to return to the sheep field while the current ruler still reigns. You have the anointing, but not the authority. The dream, but not the door. That's the divine delay between promise and placement, and it breaks even the strongest hearts. David knew this space well. He was anointed by the prophet Samuel as the future king of Israel while still a teenager. Oil on his head. heaven's vote cast. But the next day, back to delivering lunch to brothers on the battlefield. Then years of running, hiding, being hunted like a criminal by the very king he was destined to replace. The promise was true, but the placement? Delayed. And in that delay, David had to decide, will I force my calling or trust God's timing? Let me tell you about a musician named Jacob. He had a vision, clear as day, that his songs would one day bring healing to broken people. But for 5 years, no record label would sign him. No viral moment. Just cafe gigs and frustration. Until one night, a stranger asked him to play one more song. That stranger? A music producer whose mother had just passed away. The song Jacob played was about grief, and it wrecked him. That moment turned into a deal. The dream ignited. But here's the thing, the song that unlocked it. Jacob wrote it during the season he almost gave up. Here's what the author is showing us behind the veil. The delay is not a detour, it's a developer. God is not just preparing your path, He's preparing you for the path. Because premature promotion leads to public collapse. The waiting builds weight, roots, capacity. It burns out ego so only obedience remains. In a culture obsessed with overnight success, God moves at the speed of character. He gives you glimpses, flashes of promise, to anchor your faith. But then He pulls back, not to tease you, but to teach you trust. That doesn't demand proof. In this wilderness, the question isn't, is the promise still true? It's, can I still obey when the evidence vanishes? Have you ever had a moment when you knew God spoke? A confirmation, a word, a prophetic dream, and yet, years later, nothing looks like it? What if from now on, instead of doubting the promise, you embrace the process? What if the sheepfield isn't your failure, but your forge? Because right on the heels of unfulfilled dreams comes another desert, the stripping of every distraction that keeps you from hearing the next whisper. Sometimes God removes the noise, not to punish you, but so you can finally hear Him whisper again. The wilderness isn't just a place of silence, it's a place of subtraction. One by one, comforts fall away. People distance, plans collapse, platforms shrink. What you once leaned on vanishes. And you're left in a strange, holy quiet where everything that numbed you is gone. That's the desert of distractions, and it's sacred ground. We live in an age of noise. Notifications, deadlines, scrolling, podcasts, playlists, sermons, even spiritual content. It all becomes clutter. So when God wants to speak deeply, He doesn't shout louder. He clears the room. He sends you into the desert where there's no echo of applause, just you and your soul. That's when you realize distraction is often dressed as productivity. And silence? That's where God rebuilds your attention. Let me tell you a real story. A rising influencer had a massive Christian platform, millions of views, brand deals, sold-out merch. Then suddenly, burnout, creative blocks, friendships fractured. He stepped away, deleted everything, moved into a small cabin in the woods for 6 months, no phone, no camera, just a journal and God. And in that silence, he realized most of his spiritual life was performative. He had built a brand, but lost his altar. But the silence, it didn't kill him. It resurrected him. Now he leads quietly, deeply, without noise, but with fire. That's what John Bevere is pointing to in the shadows of his writing. God will lead you into places where everything fades until only your hunger remains. The stripping isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Because you cannot crave His voice while feeding endlessly on substitutes. In 2025, distraction is no longer optional, it's engineered. Every app fights for your attention. Every platform monetizes your scroll. And in that whirlwind, it's possible to be spiritually informed, but emotionally distant from God. The wilderness tears that down. It removes even good things if they're keeping you from the thing, His presence. Let me ask you this. What are you using to distract yourself from the silence of God? Is it work? Ministry? Noise wrapped in spiritual language? What if, from now on, You welcome the subtraction? What if when things fell away, instead of grasping for them, you asked, God, is this your invitation to hear you again? Because once the distractions fall, something unexpected happens. You begin to feel not just the silence, but the absence. God doesn't just feel quiet, he feels gone. And it's then, in the dead stillness, that you realize you're chasing a God who hides. It almost sounds offensive, doesn't it? That the God of love, the God who sees all, knows all, would hide. But he does, repeatedly. Not from enemies, not from the wicked, but from his beloved. Isaiah declared it. Truly, you are a God who hides yourself. And in that hiding, there's a holy mystery, because God's hiding isn't rejection, it's invitation. He hides not so we give up, but so we go deeper. Picture a father playing hide and seek with his child. The father steps behind a curtain, not to disappear forever, but to see if the child will keep searching. The longer the wait, the louder the child's steps. And when the child finally rips open the curtain, there's laughter, reunion, joy. The game wasn't about hiding, it was about hunger. So it is with God. He hides so you'll seek, and he promises, those who seek will find. Elijah experienced this firsthand. After calling down fire from heaven, after humiliating 450 false prophets, you'd think God would speak to him in thunder. But instead, God withdrew. Elijah ran into the wilderness, exhausted, suicidal, alone, and then came the windstorm. But no God. The earthquake. Still no God. The fire. Silence. And then, a still small voice, a whisper from the hidden place. That's how God moves. Behind veils, inside caves, through questions. His hiding is never distance. It's divine design. What John Bevere is drawing us toward, without ever quite saying it, is this truth. Intimacy with God requires mystery. He withholds visibility to produce pursuit. He clouds clarity to awaken desire. Because when everything is obvious, nothing is valued. And what's hidden isn't denied. It's reserved. In our era of Google spirituality, where every answer is one click away, we've lost the art of spiritual seeking. We want downloads, not devotion. But God isn't an algorithm. He's a father. And he hides so your search becomes sacred. Because the more costly the pursuit, the more transformational the discovery. Let me ask you, have you stopped seeking because he stopped showing up? Did you let silence convince you that he moved on? What if, this whole time, God has been waiting for you behind the veil, waiting to see, will you worship when the music fades? Will you chase him when the trail disappears? Because the hiding isn't forever, but it is required. And once you realize this, the rules change. You stop demanding signs. You start seeking secrets. You become okay with not knowing because you trust the one who does. But then comes the greatest test of all, walking when there's no proof, trusting when you're holding nothing. There's a kind of trust that doesn't walk on water. It walks on nothing. No signs, no feelings, no confirmation. Just a whisper you once heard months ago, maybe years ago, and now it's all you've got. That's not blind faith. It's blazing faith. Because real trust isn't when you have evidence. It's when you don't and still move. Abraham understood this better than most. God told him, go to a land I will show you. Will show. Future tense. No destination, no timeline, just movement. And Abraham obeyed, not because he saw the finish line, but because he trusted the voice that started the journey. That's what the wilderness demands. That you walk, not because you know where you're going, but because you know who called you. There's a story of a woman in Kenya who felt God ask her to start a school for girls in her rural village. She had no money, no land, no government support, but she bought a notebook, wrote Vision School on the front, and began planning. Every day she prayed over that notebook. 3 years passed, nothing. But she didn't stop. Then a missionary team arrived in the region, looking for locals with bold ideas. They met her, saw the notebook, and funded the entire dream. The first girl to graduate, her own daughter. This is what John Bevere hints at through the silence. God never promised clarity. He promised companionship. And trust isn't built through perfect instructions. It's built through imperfect obedience. God wants people who will say, even if I hear nothing else, I will still obey the last word you gave. In our current world, certainty is currency. We crave guarantees, data, signs, but heaven runs on a different system. It asks, can you obey without applause? Can you keep walking when no one's watching, when no one understands, when even your own heart doubts the path? So here's the mirror. Have you paused your obedience because you're waiting for proof? Are you treating God like a contract manager instead of a father? What if the next miracle isn't waiting on his voice, but on your next step? This is the essence of trust, to walk when the wind is gone, to worship when the stage is empty, to believe not because it feels good, but because you've been forged in the quiet long enough to know he is still who he said he is. But even trust without proof can become corrupted if we place more hope in the outcome than in the one who promised it. That's where the next deception begins. It begins innocently. You trust God for a healing, a breakthrough, a promise fulfilled. You pray, you obey, you wait. But somewhere along the way, your faith stops being about God himself and starts revolving around what he'll do for you. When the outcome becomes your obsession, you've crossed a subtle line and entered dangerous territory, because even good expectations, when worshipped, become idols. God's promises are real, but they were never meant to replace his presence. That's the quiet warning pulsing through John Bevere's message. When your faith becomes transactional, it's no longer transformational. And in the wilderness, God burns down every false altar, even the ones we built in his name. Consider the Israelites. God promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. But when Moses delayed on the mountain, they panicked. They couldn't see the outcome, so they built a golden calf, a god they could touch, control, worship on their own terms. And this wasn't Egypt's idol. It was their own creation, born out of impatience and fear. That's what happens when the outcome matters more than the intimacy. Let me tell you about a true story. A couple struggled for years with infertility. Every month was another heartbreak, but they clung to every prophetic word, every sign. One day, after years of trying, the wife said, "Even if we never have children, I'll still love him." That night, they conceived, not because God was waiting for the right time, but because their hearts had finally been unhooked from outcome-based worship. In a performance-driven culture, it's easy to tie your faith to results. If I tithe, God will bless. If I fast, he'll answer. But when the blessing delays, disillusionment creeps in. Not because God failed, but because we were holding him hostage to expectations he never signed off on. Here's the truth. God is not your vending machine. He's your Father. And sometimes the holiest thing he can do is withhold the outcome until you no longer need it to love him. So let me ask you, have you made an idol out of your outcome? Is your joy tethered to whether the prayer is answered? The deal closes? The dream happens on your timeline? What if, from this moment forward, you could say, God, you are enough. Even if you never do another thing for me, I'll stay. Because only then, when every idol is shattered, can you begin to hear what's been buried under all the noise, the language of silence itself. And trust me, it speaks, but not in words. Most people treat silence like absence. But in heaven's vocabulary, silence is one of the purest dialects of love. It doesn't scream, it doesn't plead, it doesn't entertain. It waits, it shapes, it searches for hearts that don't need noise to stay loyal. Because when God goes silent, he's not punishing you. He's speaking in a tongue that requires stillness to understand. Picture a symphony. The music builds, swells, thunders, and then it pauses. A full stop. That's silence. It's not a mistake. It's the moment the heart catches up. The silence gives the sound meaning. Without it, the music would be chaos. That's how God speaks. His silence isn't empty. It's loaded, pregnant with purpose, waiting for your spirit to listen without distraction. Let me take you to a story. An astronaut orbiting in space, alone for over 200 days. No human voice, no real-time feedback, just endless black and quiet. But he said something strange. I've never heard God clearer than when the earth was farthest away. Why? Because silence strips the soul until there's nothing left to interpret, only to receive. What John Bevere unveils, beneath the metaphors and stories, is that silence teaches you how to feel God's breath, not just his voice. When the words stop, your spirit starts paying attention to details it once ignored. A shifted emotion, a gentle impression, a verse that suddenly feels alive. Silence is not the absence of communication, it's the deepening of it. And in a 2025 world full of algorithmic noise, where every second competes for your attention, the language of heaven has never been more countercultural. We train ourselves to talk more, consume more, post more. But God, he invites you to say less, to kneel more, to wait without comment, because sometimes the loudest "I love you" from the Father sounds like nothing at all, yet reaches into the deepest places of your being. Let me ask you something daring. What if you started treating silence like a message instead of a mystery? What if, instead of resisting the quiet, you leaned into it and asked, what are you saying between the words? Because once you do, once you let that language soak into your bones, something strange happens. You stop forgetting. You start remembering. Not just who God is, but who you were before fear, disappointment, and confusion took your memory hostage. And that is the next turning point. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in quietly. A forgotten prayer that was answered. A miracle that fades into memory. A promise you once clung to, now buried beneath anxiety. This is spiritual amnesia, not the loss of God, but the loss of your history with him. And it's one of the deadliest conditions in the divine wilderness, because once you forget what he's done, it's only a matter of time before you doubt who he is. The Israelites were infamous for this. They saw the Red Sea split. They walked through walls of water. They ate bread that fell from heaven. And yet, the moment they felt thirsty, they cried, "Did God bring us here to die?" How do you go from miracle to meltdown in such a short time? Simple. You forget. That's what the wilderness does. It reveals how fast our faith can evaporate when comfort is removed. There's a woman named Lila, a single mother in Texas. Years ago, God provided supernaturally for her when she had nothing. Meals on the doorstep, tuition paid anonymously, healing for her son. But this year, when her business collapsed, she panicked. Depression sank in. She doubted everything. Then, one night, going through an old journal, she found a list. Prayers God answered. 27 entries. She wept. Not because her situation changed, but because her memory did. What John Bevere is echoing in his wilderness narrative is this. If the enemy can't steal your promise, he'll erase your memory of it, because forgetfulness breeds fear. But remembrance? That's faith's oxygen. The psalmist said, I will remember the deeds of the Lord. I will meditate on your works. Why? Because remembering rewires your emotions. It doesn't change your circumstances. It changes your posture. And here in 2025, with the flood of content, crises, and chaos we scroll through daily, spiritual memory loss is epidemic. We store verses in our phones, but forget them in our storms. We post testimonies, but panic at the next trial, because memory without meditation fades fast. Let me ask you, when was the last time you stopped to remember what God already did for you? Not just the big things, but the small moments, the near misses, the it could have been worse. What if, from now on, you made remembering a ritual? What if your greatest weapon in the silence isn't a new word, but an old one you already forgot? Because the longer you walk this desert, the more you'll realize what God is doing in you is more eternal than what he does for you. And that realization, it sets up the next storm, the battle between real faith and imitation. There's a kind of faith that looks right, sounds right, even inspires others, but when the heat comes, it crumbles. It's imitation faith, polished, rehearsed, based on formulas and borrowed confidence. It performs well in church, thrives in comfort, but vanishes in the wilderness. And the scary part? Most people don't realize they have it until God stops talking and life stops working. This is what the divine wilderness exposes. It doesn't just test your faith, it reveals the kind of faith you actually have. Not the one you post about, but the one you live with at 3 a.m. when no breakthrough is coming and the silence is deafening. That's where refined faith is born. Not in the pulpit, in the pressure. Jesus warned of this in the parable of the sower. The seeds that fell on rocky soil sprang up quickly, but when the sun rose, they withered. Why? No root. That's imitation faith. It shouts, God is good, when everything's going well. But when the sun of suffering blazes, it shrivels. Real faith, refined faith, grows underground. Quietly, painfully. It digs when no one's clapping. It believes when no one's cheering. Let me tell you a true story. A young pastor gained popularity fast, viral sermons, exploding followers, conference invites. But then came the scandal. False accusations, media attacks, friends disappeared. For 2 years, silence. No stage, no mic, just a Bible and the brutal question, do I believe this stuff or just preach it? He almost quit. Until one night, in that fire, the preacher died, but the Son of God emerged. His next sermon? No flash. But when he spoke, the room trembled. That's refined faith. This is what John Bevere is quietly shouting between the lines. God isn't impressed with hype. He wants holy, and holiness doesn't come through comfort. It comes through confrontation. The wilderness strips away every religious shell until what's left is either ashes or gold. And this matters more than ever in 2025, because faith is fashionable now. Spiritual language is everywhere. You can curate belief without conviction. You can quote scripture and still serve self. But when the shaking comes, and it always comes, only refined faith will stand. Only trust born in silence will sing in fire. So ask yourself, is your faith inherited or forged? Is it a performance or a possession? Have you built your house on Sunday soundtracks or on Monday obedience? What if, from now on, you asked God, burn away what's imitation, leave only what's eternal? Because once you let the fake fall away, something terrifying but beautiful rises. A surrender so deep it feels like death. And that's where you'll learn to lean, not on strength, but on the void itself. Surrender doesn't feel like a spiritual high. It feels like falling, like stepping off a cliff and not knowing if God will catch you or let you shatter. It's the moment your strength ends and you whisper, even if you never change this, I'll still follow. This isn't giving up. It's giving over. It's the holy recklessness of trust that no longer needs answers to obey. Leaning into the void means you stop clutching outcomes, timing, identity, even your need to be understood. It means you enter that black, silent space with open hands and whisper, your will, not mine. It's terrifying, exposing, but it's also where transformation happens, because what feels like falling is often the moment you're being remade. There's a story of a man named Elijah, not the prophet, but a missionary. After 10 years of service in Asia, everything fell apart. Visa revoked. Ministry shut down. His identity collapsed. He returned home with no plan, no clarity, no purpose. For months, he did nothing but sit by the lake behind his parents' house. One day, in the middle of that fog, he said aloud, God, if you never send me back, I'm still yours. The next morning, a letter arrived from an underground church in another region, asking him to mentor their leaders, not as a hero, as a wounded guide. The door reopened, but only after the surrender. John Bevere doesn't spoon-feed this in his book, but it pulses through every page. Until you let go, God won't reveal what's next. The void isn't the end, it's the womb. a sacred nothingness where every false identity dies so the real you can emerge. And God doesn't rescue you from that fall. He meets you mid-air. Because true intimacy isn't forged in answered prayers. It's born in unanswered ones when you still believe. In today's world, where control is king and surrender is weakness, this message feels almost offensive. We are taught to manage, manifest, optimize. But heaven doesn't bless control, it dismantles it. God doesn't need your grip. He needs your release. The tighter you hold, the slower you move. But the moment you lean into the unknown, that's when wind starts catching your fall. So I ask you, what are you still holding on to? Is it the plan, the timeline, the version of you that hasn't been shattered yet? What if, today, you let go? Not with a scream, but with a whisper. Even this is yours. Because once you lean into the void, God begins revealing the door you thought was locked forever. But it doesn't swing open like magic. It stays shut until you've changed enough to knock differently. It's one thing to face silence, another to endure the weight, but perhaps the most painful wilderness moment is standing before a door you know God promised, only to find it locked. You jiggle the handle, you fast, you pray, you knock until your knuckles bleed. Nothing. No crack, no movement, just the unbearable realization. You're not being ignored. You're being held at the threshold. We've all been there. A calling that won't manifest. A relationship that almost happened. An opportunity that seemed divine, until it didn't. And your heart wants to scream, God, you said, you confirmed. Why won't you open it? But here's the uncomfortable truth. God closes doors not just to protect you, but to prepare you. Because he cares more about who walks through the door than how soon it opens. Look at Joseph again. He interpreted dreams in prison, accurately, miraculously. Yet the man he helped forgot him for 2 more years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of standing at a locked door. But those years were not wasted. They were weight training for what was coming. Had Joseph stepped into Pharaoh's court too soon, he would have lacked the humility, the resilience, the wisdom that prison forged. The door didn't open late. It opened right on time. There's a woman I met named Serena. She had applied for a non-profit leadership role, a dream job, a God-sized door. She was qualified, favored, even prophesied over. But the answer was no. Devastated, she spent a year in obscurity, doing admin work for a small church. But during that year, she discovered a hidden burden, counseling survivors of abuse. That passion became a mission. Today, she runs her own organization, one that didn't even exist when she first knocked. Sometimes God says no to the door you want so he can build the one you were born for. What John Bevere shows, if you listen deeply, is that closed doors are not contradictions, they're clarifications. They burn off assumptions. They separate your will from his. And they remind us, open doors don't validate faith. Obedience does. In a culture that equates success with access, the kingdom measures maturity by what you do while waiting. So ask yourself, what doors are you still pounding on? Have you assumed God is silent because you're unworthy, or is he simply saying, not now? What if this delay isn't a denial, but an echo? Stay close. Not yet. I'm still shaping you. Because once you stop fighting the locked door, something shifts. You begin to see the breaking was never meant to stop you. It was meant to reveal you. And from that breaking comes breakthrough. Before the miracle, there is always the breaking. Before the light cracks through the clouds, there's the storm that makes you question everything. This is not coincidence, it's design. The kingdom doesn't hand out breakthrough without first allowing the shattering that makes you ready to hold it. You don't walk into fullness until something in you breaks wide open and stays that way. Every great story of God's deliverance begins with a fracture. Jacob wrestled with God and limped away blessed. Peter denied Jesus and became the rock of the church. Even Jesus broke bread before he fed the 5,000. What breaks, multiplies. What cracks, carries glory. But in the moment, It just feels like pain, confusion, abandonment. You cry out, "God, where are you?" But what you don't see is that the breaking isn't the end of the promise, it's the start of it. Take the story of a man named Jalen, a worship leader who lost his voice, literally. A virus damaged his vocal cords. He couldn't sing, couldn't preach. He spiraled, felt useless. But in that silence, he found something he never had before: hunger. He began writing, praying, learning to hear God without noise. 2 years later, his voice returned, different, deeper, filled with a power that only comes through breaking. And the first song he wrote after his healing, it went global. But the real miracle wasn't his voice. It was the man he became in the quiet. John Bevere, in his fire-tested tone, is telling us this. The breaking isn't your disqualification, it's your preparation. What God breaks, he intends to remake, but not in your image, in his. The pressure, the silence, the failure, it's not the death of your calling, it's the cracking open of your capacity. In today's world, we avoid pain at all costs. We numb, we scroll, we distract. But God doesn't rush the breaking. He doesn't medicate it. He stays in it with you, whispering, "Don't run. Let it finish what it started." Because some healing only comes through fracture. Some glory only seeps through broken cracks. So ask yourself, are you resisting the breaking or receiving it? Are you trying to tape yourself back together or trusting God to rebuild something unshakable? What if the very place you feel fractured is the very place breakthrough is being born? Because after the breaking, after the silence, something unthinkable happens. You begin to sense him again, not in the wind, not in the fire, but in a closeness so quiet it startles you. He was never gone. He was waiting for this version of you. There's a moment in the wilderness when something shifts, not around you, but within you. The silence hasn't ended. The waiting hasn't lifted. But suddenly, you sense something you hadn't noticed before. He's here. You can't explain it. The situation hasn't changed, but you're no longer begging for signs. You're no longer aching with absence. Somehow, without realizing it, you've been walking with him the whole time. This is the paradox of divine distance. He feels far, but he's never been closer. It's like the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Jesus walked beside them after the resurrection, but their eyes were blind to it. They poured out their confusion, their pain, their disappointment to the very one who already held the answers. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He just walked. And only after he broke the bread did they see. It was him all along. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus. Years after losing his wife to cancer, he sat in a counseling session saying, "God disappeared the night she died." But as the counselor gently asked him to recount those months, Marcus paused. "Wait, someone brought me groceries every week. My rent was paid anonymously. I never missed a single therapy session for my kids." Tears filled his eyes. I thought God was gone, but he was everywhere. John Bever's message leans into this subtle but seismic truth. Just because you can't feel God doesn't mean you've been forsaken. The wilderness is designed to develop spiritual senses that go beyond emotion. Because if we only define God by the goosebumps, we'll miss him in the ordinary. But when your spirit starts to recognize his fingerprints on a conversation, a delay, a single sentence in scripture, you realize he never left. He was just waiting for your faith to mature past feeling. In our emotionally saturated culture, we've confused intimacy with intensity, but the deepest loves aren't always loud. Ask any couple who's endured decades together. It's the quiet trust, the unseen loyalty, the unspoken presence that marks real connection. So it is with God. His silence wasn't distance. It was depth. Have you considered this? What if his absence was actually his deepest involvement? What if, instead of pulling away, he was pressing in, with a tenderness that refused to interfere until you were ready to receive? Because now, you're different. The silence didn't destroy you. It built you, And from this place of quiet strength, God will now do something else unthinkable. He will test not your ability to hear, but your ability to stand. Because once the Father trusts you with silence, He'll trust you with something more dangerous: choice. Not every test is a storm. Sometimes the hardest ones come dressed as silence, comfort, or even blessing. And in those moments, God stops shouting, because He wants to see what you'll do when the choice is entirely yours. This is the test that doesn't ask, "Do you trust God?" but something even deeper. Can God trust you? There's a shift in the divine wilderness. Early on, you're crying for answers, clinging to signs, surviving every dry day. But then something changes. God doesn't just test your faith, He trusts it. He gives you the wheel, steps back, and watches. Not because He's abandoning you, but because He believes in what He built in you. It's like raising a child. At first, you guide every step, correct every move, but one day you hand them the keys. You watch them pull out of the driveway. You don't stop loving them. You're honoring their growth. This is what God does with mature sons and daughters. He gives you choices that don't come with flashing lights, and in that freedom your heart is revealed. Think of Abraham. After decades of silence and waiting, God finally gives him Isaac, the promise. Then, the unthinkable. Sacrifice him. No explanation. No rescue plan. Just obedience or disobedience. It wasn't about Isaac. It was about trust. Would Abraham still obey when the command made no sense? He did. And in that moment, God said something staggering. Now I know. Not that God lacked knowledge, but in real time, Abraham proved, "You can trust me now." There's a woman named Chloe. After 10 years of living in bitterness, she finally forgave the man who left her. A month later, he reached out, wanting to talk. Her heart raced. Was this restoration? But instead of rushing back in, she paused, prayed, and chose peace over fantasy. That decision rewrote her entire future. No fire from heaven, no angelic chorus, just quiet obedience. A test that she passed, and heaven smiled. John Bevere threads this truth into every chapter of God. Where are you? The silence isn't just your test, it's heaven's trust in you. God doesn't stay quiet to punish you. He's watching what you'll do with the maturity He's developed. Will you still serve without applause? Will you still forgive without reward? Will you still obey when no one is watching? So I'll ask you, if heaven stopped speaking tomorrow, would you still walk the same path? Would you keep loving, giving, praying, simply because it's who you've become? What if your next breakthrough doesn't depend on more revelation, but on faithful repetition? Because now you're not just walking through silence, you're speaking into it. And from this final crucible comes the gift you never expected. Not thunder, not spectacle, but a voice so personal, it redefines everything. You expected a trumpet, a flash of light, a booming word from the clouds that would finally make sense of all the silence. But that's not how God speaks when the wilderness ends. He doesn't shout, He whispers. Because by now, your ears have been trained. You no longer need volume to recognize Him. You no longer need fire to believe He's near, the void that once haunted you. It's become home, and it's there, in the stillness, that the voice returns. Not to explain, not to justify the silence, but to affirm something deeper. You made it. You passed through silence without losing your worship. You carried the promise through delay. You stayed when others quit. And now, you hear not because God has changed, but because you have. This voice is different. It doesn't come with drama. It comes with weight. A weight that settles in your spirit and whispers things like, "Well done. Now you understand." You can carry what's next. It's a voice that doesn't just speak to you. It lives in you. There's a young man named Levi. For years he felt abandoned by God. His prayers for purpose went unanswered. He wandered, doubted, almost deconstructed his faith completely. But he kept returning to the quiet, kept journaling, kept choosing obedience without reward. One morning, while reading scripture, nothing new, just routine, He paused. A phrase leapt off the page. Not in his mind, in his bones. He knew it. God just spoke. No lightning, no miracle, just the unmistakable intimacy of presence. This is what John Bevere's wilderness prepares us for, not fireworks, but fusion, a kind of knowing that goes deeper than hearing. You don't just hear God, you start living from his voice, because the silence trained your soul to distinguish it from all the other noise. In 2025, the world is loud. Voices everywhere. Opinions, headlines, spiritual influencers shouting over each other. And yet, the ones who carry real weight aren't the ones who talk the most. They're the ones who know the void, who've walked it, sat in it, bled in it, and now carry a whisper that shifts rooms. So let me ask you one last time. What if the silence wasn't the absence of God, but the deepening of your ears? What if everything he didn't say was making you ready to finally hear what he always meant? Because in the end, you didn't just survive the wilderness, you were reborn in it. And now, when the next storm comes, you won't panic. You'll listen. Because once you've heard the voice in the void, nothing else will satisfy. You've just journeyed through the divine wilderness. 20 sacred stages, 20 revelations shaped not by noise, but by quiet. Maybe you saw yourself in the waiting room. Maybe you've been ghosted by heaven and wondered if you did something wrong. Maybe you're still staring at a locked door, wondering if it was all a lie. But if this journey whispered anything, it's this. God hasn't abandoned you. He's just speaking in silence. And that silence, it's not empty. It's where real faith is forged. Let's remember together. You learned that the silence is a classroom, not a curse. That waiting isn't wasted time, but sacred time. That your emotional numbness isn't a sign of failure, it's your soul detoxing. That closed doors don't mean rejection, they mean refinement. That the breaking isn't the end, it's the birthplace of breakthrough. And most of all, that when God feels far, he's often closer than ever. Now it's your turn. Drop a comment. Where in your life has God felt silent, and what did you learn through it? Your voice might be the whisper someone else is waiting for. Share your story. Invite others to listen in the silence with you. If this video stirred something in you, don't just click away. Like it. Share it with someone who's standing in their own wilderness. Subscribe if you're ready to walk deeper, not louder. And remember, the loudest move of God may come wrapped in silence, because real transformation doesn't shout. It whispers. End of script. The wilderness has taught you to hear the language of heaven in ways you never imagined. Your soul has been refined in the fire of silence, shaped in the crucible of waiting, and strengthened in the furnace of faith. What felt like abandonment was actually appointment. You are no longer the same person who entered this desert. You have been transformed by the very silence that once tormented you. The void has become your teacher, the quiet your companion, and the waiting your greatest gift. Now you understand. The silence was never empty. It was pregnant with purpose. Every unanswered prayer was answered in ways you couldn't see. Every closed door was God protecting what he was preparing you for. The breakthrough isn't coming. It's already here. It lives in your transformed heart, your refined character, your deepened trust. You are the miracle you were praying for. You are the answer to your own desperate cries. This wilderness journey has revealed the greatest truth of all. You don't need God to speak for you to know he loves you. His love isn't measured by his words. It's proven by his presence, even in the silence. You've learned to worship without music, to pray without answers, to trust without proof. You've discovered that faith isn't about getting what you want. It's about becoming who God created you to be. The silence that once felt like punishment now feels like privilege. The wait that once felt like delay now feels like preparation. The void that once felt like emptiness now feels like sacred space. You've graduated from the school of silence. You've earned your degree in divine trust. You've mastered the art of hearing God in the whisper, finding him in the void, and seeing his love in the wait. The diploma isn't written on paper, it's written on your heart. The certificate isn't framed on a wall, it's lived in your daily choices. You carry the credentials of someone who has walked through fire and emerged as gold. This is your commissioning moment. You're being sent back into the world not as someone who needs constant encouragement, but as someone who can give it. Not as someone who requires signs, but as someone who can be one. You are no longer a victim of your circumstances. You are a victor over them. You are no longer asking, "Why me?" You are declaring, "Try me." The wilderness has made you dangerous to the enemy and precious to God. Go now with the authority of someone who has been tested by silence and emerged with a voice. Carry the quiet confidence of one who knows that when everything else fails, God remains. You are no longer afraid of the wilderness. You are its graduate. And that graduation changes everything.